Good evening, friends, and welcome to Mirror Valley. Good evening, friends. There appears to be a new story in my book. Let's take a look, shall we?
Reunion. Jeremy awoke from a deep sleep to the sound of his phone. He reached out, eyes still closed, groping around on the nightstand until he had it in hand. Opening his eyes, struggling to focus on the screen, he saw the text message. It was from his mother. "Breakfast at the usual place," it read. Jeremy shot off a quick reply. "There in 15, he wrote, before tossing the phone back on the nightstand. He closed his eyes for another moment, wisps of the dream world he'd been inhabiting still swirling around behind his eyes. Then, mustering up all the energy he could, he threw the covers aside and sprung to his feet. Moments later, Jeremy was dressed and out on the street. It was a brisk autumn morning, only a few billowing clouds marring the sea-blue sky, but Jeremy, as usual, barely noticed the skies above him. It was his mother that always found the beauty in such things. A cloud, a tree, an empty blue sky. She would often call attention to them, exclaiming to anyone within earshot, "Isn't it beautiful?" Jeremy had learned to do his best to return her enthusiasm, but whatever remarkable qualities she found in such things were lost on him. There was little beauty worth commenting upon in Jeremy's world. He made his way slowly but deliberately along the well-worn path toward the corner diner where he and his mother had been meeting for years. Around him, the world was humming along nicely, like a well-oiled machine. But something in the back of his sleep-addled mind was troubling him. Despite the beautiful morning and clear skies, he couldn't shake the unsettling feeling, buried deep beneath the fog of sleep still enveloping his mind, that something was profoundly wrong. His brain absent-mindedly circled this suspicion with increasing clarity until, finally, as he rounded the last corner and the diner loomed in front of him, the realization came crashing down on him with the force of 1,000 waves. His mother had been dead for almost 4 years. He stopped in his tracks, confused. Had he dreamt the whole thing? He pulled out his phone and looked at the messages. There it was, a text message from his mother's phone number. He'd never been able to remove it from his phone. Sent this morning, inviting him to breakfast. He stared at the message for what felt like minutes, hoping for some clarity. His brain simply sat there and stared along with him, and he found himself wishing desperately he was operating with the benefit of having already had his morning coffee. Finally, his mind came to a desperate conclusion, the only one he could construct. It must be a prank. Someone, somehow, had obtained his mother's old phone number, and for some currently inexplicable reason, was posing as her. The diner sat on the corner at the end of the street, calling to him. He hadn't set foot in there since he'd lost his mother. Too many memories. He pocketed his phone and once again put one foot in front of another, wondering what, if anything, he would find inside. He reached the front doors of the diner, and taking a deep breath, he stepped inside for the first time in years. His eyes were immediately drawn to their old table where, much to Jeremy's surprise, his mother sat, looking up at him with a smile as she beckoned for him to join her. Slowly, in a daze, he made his way to the table and sat down in his usual chair across from her. Her smile broadened and she put her hands across the table. "It's so good to see you," she said. Jeremy simply stared, speechless. The waitress offered to pour him a cup of coffee, and he accepted automatically. He took a sip, the hot, brisk liquid jolting him from his stupor. "I'm dreaming," he said, finally. She nodded at him in understanding. "I'm sorry to surprise you like this, hon." Still staring, Jeremy managed. "You're dead." "Sure," she said. "But I had to see you again." Jeremy didn't know what to say, what to think, so he simply sat, sipping his coffee and staring. His mother looked through the window. "Isn't the sky beautiful this morning?" she remarked. Jeremy nodded without so much as a glance. "How are you liking your new job?" Jeremy stared at her for a moment, taken aback by her casual disposition. His job? Right now, he could barely even remember he had one. He forced himself to speak, told her about his work. She seemed to know all about his current life and listened with rapt attention as he recounted the career struggles he'd been experiencing. She listened, as always, without attempting to offer advice or fix anything. She was simply present and open. Jeremy had forgotten that about her, how much he appreciated it. Slowly, the strangeness of the morning took a back seat to his mother's presence in front of him, and the two engaged in what felt like a surprisingly normal conversation. Just like old times. Finally, once she was sufficiently caught up on Jeremy's current life, he said, "Mom, I don't understand. What is this? How are you here?" She smiled and reached across the table, taking Jeremy's hand, touching him for the first time. "It's unusual, I know," she said. "I just had to see you, to let you know I'm okay." His mother's hand on his was warm and comforting. Jeremy was holding back tears now. "And I want you to be okay, too," she said. "To live a good life. Will you do that for me?" Jeremy thought about the last few years since she'd been gone, the aftermath of her death, the grief, the depression, the drinking, the despair. He didn't know how much his mother knew, but the thought of her seeing how far he'd fallen since she'd gone shamed him. He looked away, attempting to reclaim his hand, but his mother held on. "Do it for me," she whispered. "Do it for yourself." Jeremy was struggling to maintain his composure. He replied through clenched teeth, afraid that anything more might bring a flood of tears along with it. "I don't know if I can," he said. She sighed, reaching out and taking his head in her hands. She turned his head toward her, locking eyes with him. "I do," she replied. He felt her encouragement, her belief in him, as almost a tangible thing, the sort of unwavering belief that only a mother could have for her son. He couldn't help himself. The tears were falling freely now. "I miss you so much," he whispered. "I know," she said. "You're not alone, Jeremy. You're not alone." Jeremy pulled away, rubbing his eyes and wiping the tears from his cheeks. When he looked back up, his mother was gone. He looked around the diner, but she was nowhere to be found. Jeremy sat for some time, staring at his mother's half-empty cup of coffee cooling on the table in front of him, still scarcely able to believe what had just happened. Perhaps he'd dreamt the whole thing. Or maybe he was losing his mind. Something deep inside of him rejected these notions. No. The only explanation that made sense to him, that felt true, was that somehow his mother, dead these many years, had come to pay him a visit. Sometime later, well after his own cup of coffee had been emptied, Jeremy paid the bill, left a generous tip, and exited the diner. As he stepped out onto the street, and the brisk autumn air rushed up to meet him. He paused, taking a deep breath, drinking it all in. Above him, a few large clouds drifted slowly by. Jeremy looked up at them, admiring the way they shimmered against the deep blue. He smiled in spite of himself and thought, "Doesn't the sky look beautiful this morning?"
Nothing quite like ending an evening with a good book. When I discover another new tale in these pages, I'll be sure to let you know. Until then, keep your eyes open, your mind sharp, and remember, what you see in the mirror is not always what it appears to be. Good night, friends.
Please help us out and like this video, and subscribe to the Mirror Valley YouTube channel. Click the bell to be notified of new videos almost every week.